Member for Vieux South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I do not want to incur your wrath this afternoon, and for that reason, I will stay away from responding to the summation by the member for Micoud South on his interpretation of the state of the economy and his assessment of why we are where we are today. You know, Mr. Speaker, I hope sometime that you will be kind enough to issue guidelines as to what a summation in a budget, in a debate should be. Because you see, Mr. Speaker, I thought we were debating earlier the state of emergency, and then for the better part of the contribution of the member for Micoud South, when members of the opposition were not allowed to touch issues of the economy, then he is given the right to reply to issues that have not been raised by the opposition. Be that as it may, I leave it to you in your wisdom to issue the guidelines as to what a summation in a debate should be. Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition has already stated the position of the Opposition that it supports the payment of support, financial support and assistance to contributors to the NIC who now find themselves in the very difficult position of being unemployed. That is the formal position already communicated by the Leader of the Opposition. But you know, Mr. Speaker, there will be a life after COVID-19, meaning that when it's all over, that the future generations of the National Insurance Company will have to be assured, be comforted, that their National Insurance Corporation is able to take care of them in their moments when, of course, they are in the dying days of their retirement. So, whatever we do in this House today, Mr. Speaker, we have to bear in mind that ultimately we have to think hard and very carefully about the viability of the National Insurance Corporation, and that its integrity, Mr. Speaker, I think remains intact. That being said, Mr. Speaker, I thought it was rather disappointing that we did not have the benefits of figures today to justify the actions of the board, because the member for Micoud South made it absolutely clear that it was not a request he made to the National Insurance Corporation. He said he received a telephone call and that the chairman of the board advised him that these sums were available and he could utilize it. The only substantive information he gave was that this initiative is likely to cost between 33 and 80 million, and not $33 million in 3 months, as contended by the member for Ancillary Canrees. He said specifically it will cost between 33 and 80 million dollars. Now that is an incredible spread to suggest that this is going to cost that. But I accept that there will be zones of uncertainty in this matter, because we don't know quite correctly, as was said, how many persons are going to apply for assistance and how many persons in the end will get such assistance. So, Mr. Speaker, it is worrisome that there is so much uncertainty regarding what we are dealing with for such a sensitive organization, such a sensitive entity. And I believe that all of us would have been helped considerably if more realistic figures were given about the information, the expenditure, the number of persons likely to benefit, etc. And I'm very surprised that the National Insurance Corporation, if it is the author of this initiative, does not, of course, make sure that this information is made available to members of the House. The government of St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, finds itself in a very important and unique position when it comes to the National Insurance Corporation. The government is really a trustee of the savings of the workers and employees of this country, a legislative trustee. Meaning that when you examine the existing National Insurance Corporation Act, Mr. Speaker, you will notice that every effort was made in that existing act to protect the National Insurance Corporation from the government of St. Lucia. There are few points at which the government could interfere with the National Insurance Corporation. And this was done during the tenure of the government that I had the honor to lead, and at the time when the director was Ms. Emma Hippolyte, a former member of this parliament and a former director of the National Insurance Corporation. So that, Mr. Speaker, the objective has always been to protect the National Insurance Corporation from politicians and from the government itself, and to allow the government to be nothing else but a legislative trustee of the integrity of the National Insurance Corporation. Now, this corporation admittedly has done some very bizarre things of late, but I shall come to that in a few minutes. I agree, Mr. Speaker, with the Leader of the Opposition that if we had the latest financial report as well as the actuarial report with us to consider this, it would have made life easier and it would have been helpful. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, Section 22 requires that these audits be presented within 3 months of the end of the financial year. The director is required to submit to the board a report of in respect of the following financial year. This then, of course, has to go to Parliament, and Section 23 says the board to submit national financial statement for laying before the House. The board shall submit to the minister not later than 3 months after its receipt a copy of the accounts and reports under Section 22, together with a report by the chairperson of the activities of the corporation for the same period, and the minister shall, within 3 months of its receipt, lay the same before the House of Assembly. It is my understanding that these reports have been prepared, they are ready, they were submitted to the Cabinet Office in the usual way, and so are in the possession of the government. All I'm saying is, and of course, this could be refuted, all I'm saying is that if these reports are in fact available to build a trust and confidence that is so vitally needed, those reports should have been laid in the House, and I would, of course, hope that once they are available, they are laid in the House as soon as possible. Because I am at the edge of incredulity, at the edge, Mr. Speaker. Because a member from Micoud South says that he was advised by the board that the actuarial report, so he's conceding that it exists, made 4 months ago, well before the COVID crisis, does suggest that the use of this $33 to $80 million would not in any way impair the financial fundamentals of the National Insurance Corporation. Obviously, the actuarial report could not have anticipated such a massive expenditure, such a big hole in the finances of the National Insurance Corporation. It could not. But I understand the member for Micoud South and the Minister of Finance to be saying that when you look at the economic fundamentals of the actuarial report, then the assessment is that if you're going to make a payment of $33 to $80 million, it is not going to impair the financial viability of the NIC. Clearly, Mr. Speaker, all of us would want to see that, to be satisfied that this is the case. And the Leader of the Opposition put it right, because there were already signals in the previous actuarial report that adjustments will have to be made to the National Insurance Corporation, particularly because its very viability will come into question, I think, in the year 2050. So, Mr. Speaker, this is really a very, very crucial issue. Now, Mr. Speaker, I raise the question about jealously protecting the National Insurance Corporation and keeping the government as far away as possible from the National Insurance Corporation. And it is for good reason, Mr. Speaker, for very good reason, because it is always a tempting cash cow. And that is why we have had to resort to the kind of mechanisms that we have adopted in the past. Mr. Speaker, that is why I can understand the concerns raised about the proposed Clause 5 amending or introducing a new Section 65G. It says, the minister may make regulations for all matters required or permitted to be prescribed under this part relating to an economic relief program. And I am not for one moment raising any issue of abuse of powers at this stage. I'm not, Mr. Speaker. But that's what it says. Yet, of course, if you look at Section Clause 5, introducing a new Part 5, it says, subject to this act, the board may establish an economic relief program. So we have the logical inconsistency that it is for the board to establish an economic relief program, yet it is for the Minister of Finance under 65G to make regulations for all matters required or permitted to be prescribed under this part. There you have the kind of collision that I'm referring to. Destroying the philosophical underpinnings of the National Insurance Board. The proper authority to make the regulations ought to be the board, not the minister. But I concede, on the other hand, that the board should not necessarily be allowed to use a legislative power on its own, and either one or two models could be utilized. The first model could be the minister may on the recommendation of the board, so it is the board that makes the recommendation. Alternatively, the board may make regulations subject to the approval of the minister. And in that way, you keep the integrity of the National Insurance Corporation intact. Why are we interfering with the symmetry of the National Insurance Corporation? Tempting as it is to respond to you, the man from Lilliput, but this is not the right time for you. The right time for you. This is not the right time for you. Now, Mr. Speaker, leave the Lilliputian alone. Now, Mr. Speaker, the second technical point that I just want to make, and this is minor, but of course this could be helped, the drafting could be helped considerably. We look at Clause 65, the newer Section 65C, again under Clause 5. Without prejudice to Section 65B, an insured person shall satisfy the director that he or she is under the pensionable age on the date that he or she makes the claim under Section 65D. That's fine. He or she is engaged in insurable employment on the prescribed date. That's fine. C and D. He or she has paid not less than the prescribed contributions. And D, he or she has paid contributions for the prescribed contribution period. Now, this doesn't grasp the partnership that exists with NIC. The contributions are paid both by the employee as well as the employer. And contributions are not solely made by the employee. the person who was employed who has lost the opportunity for gainful employment. It's a joint process. And perhaps what we should be saying simply is that without prejudice to Section 65B, an insured person shall satisfy the director that the prescribed contributions have been paid. And the prescribed contributions would obviously come from both the employee as well as the employer. So it's a matter of ensuring the broad thrust of the amendment, and at the same time, Mr. Speaker, ensuring some drafting elegance. So, as I said, it could be under C. Without prejudice to Section 65B, an insured person shall satisfy the director that the prescribed contributions have been paid. And under D, should be under D, the contributions for the prescribed person has been paid. But of course, I'm aware of the fate that awaits recommendations to amend legislation, even to improve the quality and the elegance of such legislation. So I'm not going to take this anywhere further, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's one final issue that I want to raise. I was astounded to hear, Mr. Speaker, that $33 to $80 million may be used by the National Insurance Corporation to finance this program. And the opposition has already said that they don't have difficulties with this. They understand full well that these are exceptional circumstances and financial help has to be sourced from wherever it could be secured. Obviously, Mr. Speaker, the thousands who are unemployed or who are not contributors to the National Insurance Scheme, that is going to require some delicate maneuvering to provide them with the assistance that they need. But the reality of the situation is that the government of St. Lucia is making use of pension funds intended to pay pensioners at their retirement. That's the reality. And it seems odd that the National Insurance Scheme would spend $33 to $80 million of pensioners' contribution, and we do not know how that will be replaced. And that is why, again, even your facts and figures now become even more critical. Where is NIC taking this money from? Is NIC taking this money from its accumulated profits, its accumulated savings? Where exactly it is coming from? And how is it that the government can utilize these sums of money for this program, useful and necessary as it is, but yet do not have to pay it back? And how exactly do we justify that? Who really fills up that hole? If it is a gift, a gratuitous gift, then the NIC has an even heavier responsibility, Mr. Speaker, to explain to us how it has achieved that, Mr. Speaker. And I do not know whether the government needs to rethink that approach to say, all right, we're going to accept this largesse from the National Insurance Corporation. Yes, it is for the benefit of the people of St. Lucia, for the workers of St. Lucia. But at the same time, we need to protect the integrity of the institution, and we have to find a mechanism to allow for these funds to be made available to NIC in due course. Mr. Speaker, no one knows where this is going to end. No one. No one knows, Mr. Speaker, what is going to happen in the next 3 months after the first tranche is gone. we are dealing with imponderables. And I believe the opposition sympathizes with the reality of that situation. And today, of course, is obviously not even the day to reflect on the issues that have been raised in the course of the parliamentary year. Today is not a day for that, Mr. Speaker. That is why I'm not going to incur your wrath. But having said that, Mr. Speaker, I believe that the government of St. Lucia does owe an explanation to future pensioners how this is going to be dealt with in due course. Because to me, it seems most unusual that such a huge chunk of money could be extricated, pulled out of the National Insurance Corporation, albeit for the benefit of St. Lucians, and yet there is no mechanism in terms of how you deal with the hole that it creates, or whether there is a hole at all. I think further explanation, Mr. Speaker, is definitely required. Having said this, Mr. Speaker, I hope the National Insurance Corporation itself will be a little more open, more transparent, and ensure that full information is made available to the public of St. Lucia, because, as I said, the government is no more than a legislative trustee for the pension funds of the people of St. Lucia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.